Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. It's been 30 years since the Montreal Massacre, when 14 women were gunned down. Today, politicians in Ottawa acknowledged more has to be done, saying it was an opportunity to recognize and eradicate violence against women. Both the Prime Minister and the leader of the NDP used murdered and missing Indigenous women as an example of that. But first, here's the House observing a moment of silence.
It is more than time for change. It is more than time to put an end to gender-based violence, including the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Because it is more than time to build a country where everyone is safe and where everyone's rights are respected and realized.
It was in Toronto last year when a bitter young man with a violent hatred for women ran down 10 people with a van. And it is here every single day when Indigenous women and girls are dehumanized, stolen from their communities, and murdered.
Thursday's throne speech from the Trudeau government is coming under fire by opposition parties and Independent MP Jody Wilson-Raybould. Jamie Pashagumskum has reaction from Ottawa.
And what he's done is not good enough. And so I'm saying to him, hey, Mr. Prime Minister, let's chat, because this is not good enough. I want to see something more clear.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is not convinced of the government's commitment to Indigenous peoples while fighting the Human Rights Tribunal's compensation order. He says the throne speech lacked substance on child welfare and other key issues.
Right now, this is not what people need. People need real commitments. These are real crises that people are faced with, and what they're offering is not proportional to the seriousness of the problems that people are going through. We need real action on housing, on health care, on fighting the climate crisis, justice for Indigenous people. That's not what we heard in the throne speech.
Former Trudeau cabinet minister Jody Wilson-Raybould said the speech could have offered more on climate change.
The issue of resource development pipelines kind of was tacitly mentioned in the speech from the throne yesterday. It's a controversial issue. I'm not sure how one can be a climate champion and build pipelines at the same time. This is something that came up quite often in our election in Vancouver. It's a very divisive issue in Vancouver, but first and foremost, the biggest, most pressing issue facing our time is climate change, and we have to do everything we can to meet our targets and be explicit about how we're going to meet our targets and be accountable for meeting those targets.
Green Party caucus leader Elizabeth May said the Liberals fall short again on climate change and Indigenous rights.
That currently what we have as a climate target is wholly inadequate. Our pace of acting on reconciliation is woeful. And when you look at something like pushing ahead with the Trans Mountain Pipeline and saying that's essential, blows through our climate targets, ignores the rights of the Indigenous peoples.
Singh said his goal is not to tear down government if the throne speech went to a confidence vote, and left the door open to NDP support if the Liberals provide more details. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Today's first day of Parliament's new session brought with it the first question period. And the NDP wasted no time. Here is what newly elected Nunavut MP Mumalak Kokok asked as her first question in the House of Commons.
We know that climate change is a crisis. It threatens the lives and the abilities for our hunters to provide for families and communities. We need to treat it just as is, a crisis. In Nunavut, we continue to fight for basic human rights, a safe place to live, being able to afford to feed ourselves, and clean drinking water. The Prime Minister gives billions to oil and gas companies and delays climate action for 20 years. 2050 is the target now. These companies are being put ahead of people, our Canadians. When will the government work for people?
Climate change is a crisis. Clearly, Canadians told us in the election that they want governments and all members of this House to address climate change on an urgent basis. There is no area in Canada that is more affected by climate change than the North. We must act. We must act now. We have said that we will work, and we look to other parties to work with us to exceed the target that we established for 2030 and to move towards a net zero economy in 2050. I look forward to working with my honourable colleagues to do just that.
The Poundmaker's Lodge Treatment Centre in Alberta is expanding. They are adding new beds to help treat addictions. However, the expansion means that the Nechi Institute, located in the same building, has to relocate. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
The province of Alberta has partnered with Poundmaker's Lodge Treatment Centre near Edmonton with a commitment of $1.4 million per year. The money will add 28 new addiction treatment beds and also include emergency detox beds. Brad Cardinal is the executive director of Poundmaker.
We're now able to implement opioid addiction-specific beds and a 5-bed medical detox unit with 24/7 medical care.
Jason Luan is the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions for Alberta. Part of the $1.4 million investment will also fund 7 beds at the Esquale Healing Lodge. They say 900 additional people will be helped over 3 years.
So when we have detox, when we have indigenous culture-sensitive treatment program here, when we have post-support services all provided here, can you imagine the power of impact that will give to Poundmaker Lodge and to the people in our province who access this service?
The expanded beds come with the cost of losing the Nechi Institute, situated in the same building. For over 45 years, the Institute has taught instructors, healthcare workers, and government workers on how to heal the pain of addictions. The Institute was told they have to leave in March. Marilyn Buffalo is the CEO of the Nechi Institute. She spoke to APTN at the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa.
Well, they're out to kill Nechi. There's no question about that. We are not government funded. Nechi is not government funded. We're independent. We have our own governance structure and our own board, and that's the way it's always been. We are in danger of we are homeless now, effective March 2020, and Poundmaker gets millions of dollars from the Alberta government. That's a contrast here.
She says the Nechi Institute and its students and faculty have an uncertain future.
You don't destroy an institution that's been there for 45 years and replace it with nothing. We haven't had any phone calls from the infrastructure, the people that gave us the notice, nor have we received any act of justice from the Premier's office. Nobody's talked to us. Despite what they're saying in the media, we are left defenseless.
Associate Minister Jason Luan says the eviction was necessary due to the opioid epidemic.
I have to emphasize this is the time we're still in crisis. People are dying on a daily basis. We can't sit on our chairs while figure out, take another 4 months to figure out a solution. We have to act on it.
Alberta Indigenous Relations Minister Rick Wilson says his office will work with the Nechi Institute to find a new home. Marilyn Buffalo says she is still waiting to hear from the Alberta government about what happens next. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, St. Albert.
Still to come, the conclusion of our Perspective series on climate change and the impact on youth in the Northwest Territories. You won't want to miss that. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. +1 with snow for St. John's, sunny and -4 in Fredericton. A rain-snow mix and 11 below for Nain. Snow and -3 for Cartwright. Sunny and 6 below for Montreal. Cloudy day and -3 for Chibougamau. -4 in Peterborough. Sunny and -5 for Ottawa. Snow and -2 for Thunder Bay. -1 with snow for Wawa. 25 below in Churchill with snow. A rain-snow mix and 7 below for God's Lake. Snow in Winnipeg and a high of -3. Snow and 0 for Brandon. 0 with snow for Regina. A rain-snow mix and -6 for North Battleford. -27 under sunny skies in Uranium City. Welcome back. For centuries, Dene, Inuit, and Métis of the North have always acted during environmental change, and today is no different. Youth are gearing up and arming themselves with knowledge to adapt and find solutions to global warming. Our reporter Charlotte Mort Jacobs concludes our Youth Climate Change Perspective series in Inuvik.
In the Arctic, it's 2 degrees warmer than it was 70 years ago. A small number with a big impact. At this rate, it could mean dramatic changes, like a sea ice-free summer, or a picturesque barren land without caribou. Jillian Gear from Postville, Labrador, is one of the delegates at a climate change summit here in Inuvik. She wants to help her community prepare.
We're really isolated, so we get freight either by a twin otter or by boat in the summertime. And if climate change affects our weather so greatly, I mean, how are things coming into the community? It could be up to a week before we can get a plane in sometimes because we're fogged in so badly.
Gear knows the time to act is now. The only fluent Inuktitut speaker in her community passed on 4 years ago, and cultural teachings are at risk of being lost.
I'm not sure if anybody knows how to make a pair of traditional waterproof sealskin boot in Postville, but it's definitely something that young people would like to see. Like myself, I would love to learn how to go out and, you know, kill a seal and skin it and dry it and make something out of it.
For Gear, the fight against climate change begins with education.
It's been a while since we had somebody with education, you know, visiting schools and kind of doing like a career presentation. This is, like, for example, this is all you can do within like environmental science or...
Today, youth are here at Inuvik Squitchin Tribal Council to hear from young leaders like Jordan Peterson. They're learning the step-by-step process on how to get climate change workshops and on-the-land camps up and running in their home communities.
And then you guys here both got
It only takes a few minutes for youth to list what they fear losing to climate change. Now comes the action part of the summit. Youth are expected to bring back a climate change strategy to their community.
How I'm going to communicate through projects is social media.
Ethan Ayakfo is from Gameti, Northwest Territories. He was moved by hearing what his peers like Gear had to say about cultural loss.
I felt that connection with her. It's hard to accept that and to hear about it. Well, I feel closest with the drum.
For Ayakfo, Indigenous culture and identity is directly tied to the land, and he's already noticed changes.
I kind of was thinking about just the decline of caribou, and I didn't really connect the two, the effects of climate change and what will happen to my region if it's affected drastically, especially with a drum. That drum is very, for us, it's very powerful.
Everyone agrees there's an individual responsibility to do what's possible to save the North.
Stand up, find like your resources, learn about climate change like with your elders or with local leaders.
Over the last 5 days, these youth from across the North have connected with researchers, elders, and local leaders. And the message is clear. Climate change is having an impact, and the people of the North are on the front lines. The only question is what happens next.
There's connections and bridges that are being built with the youth, and I feel like we can discuss and see how our progress are going.
For now, they will take the knowledge they have gained back to their communities. A small step, but one that could have a lasting impact in the years to come.
Before the settlers came, Indigenous peoples have always adapted because the culture is for the people. The culture will adapt to what the people need.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Inuvik.
And you can watch and read Charlotte's entire perspective series about youth climate change in the NWT on our website, aptnnews.ca. A brand new episode of APTN Investigates is just minutes away. We'll speak with the award-winning journalist about her new documentary after the break. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Sunny and 23 below for Fort Chipewyan, minus 10 in Fort McMurray. A rain-snow mix and plus 7 for Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. Rain and 10 above for Victoria, Vancouver, and Tofino. Minus 15 with snow for Fort Nelson. Plus 3 under sunny skies in Prince Rupert. Minus 35 for Old Crow. Minus 7 for Whitehorse. 23 below for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. Minus 30 for Yellowknife. Welcome back. In northern communities where the cost of living is far higher, feminine products may be 3 times as much as they are in cities. So Nicole White, who lives in Saskatoon, came up with the idea to help women and girls in northern Saskatchewan. She started a project called Moontime Sisters. Nicole heard about girls in the north who missed school because they didn't have menstrual products. She started volunteering her time to raise money to put together care packages for northern communities in Saskatchewan. Several women volunteer with her and donate time and money. Nicole says the feedback from communities in the north inspires her to continue the project.
We hear of some of the issues the north is facing, and they seem so big and so intangible. But this is doable, which is why I was like, you know what, let's send those care packages up, and it's really touched the hearts of a lot of women. I've gotten a lot of beautiful messages from women who are like, here's $20, I was there, I'm happy to help. So it's sort of one of those things where a lot of women have been in that spot and are happy to help us do our work.
Great job, Nicole. Well, 20 years ago, the Mi'kmaq celebrated a big win at the Supreme Court of Canada. The 1999 Marshall decision upheld treaty rights. For the Mi'kmaq, it meant access to the lucrative Atlantic fishing industry. Trina Roach looks at the impact today in a 2-part documentary called Living Treaties. Part 1 airs tonight on APTN Investigates, and Trina joins us now. Trina, good to see you. What's been the biggest success 20 years later?
Canada's response to the Marshall decision was to slide the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq or Maliseet into the existing commercial fishery. And 20 years later, I mean, we see a lot of success. There was training and boats and gear and licenses, and now, I mean, there's 35 communities, so I mean, you have varying levels of success story, but it's a huge economic driver for First Nations in the region. $125 million a year, over 1,800 jobs. So you see that bands are putting in new roads with own source revenue or building houses. So you can see the difference, and that there's a lot of success stories 20 years later.
Are there still some challenges then that still need to be addressed?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge is that for Mi'kmaq, because the existing commercial fishery, that access is not an implementation of the treaty right. And so for Mi'kmaq who want to access the fishery and go fishing, just like Donald Marshall Jr. did when he caught and sold eels in 1996, and that's what the case was about, when they want to go fishing based on their treaty right, you know, they're being charged by DFO, they're having their gear seized by DFO. That is still an illegal fishery. And so that is the big gap and the big question and the big frustration right now, is that's what's missing 20 years later.
Trina, you were on a few lobster boats for this story. What was it like working on it?
Yeah, I couldn't complain about my office on some days for sure. And it was during the summer, and the weather was beautiful, and I'm out on a boat, and it was really beautiful. The biggest thing for this, though, was to go back to the archives. I mean, there's sort of a parallel. Like 1999, the Marshall decision came out. APTN had, you know, just hit the air as a network. In 2000. APTN News had started, and that was when we saw a lot of the conflict following the Marshall decision, especially up in Burn Church. And so, you know, APTN was there, and I was able to get that footage, that raw footage, from when we were there on the ground. And then I started with APTN in the summer of 2001, and the first thing I did was go up to Burn Church and spend the summer up there almost, because there was ongoing conflict and tensions even at that point. And so it was sort of you know, amazing for me to see some of that old footage. And really it's where I sort of began my journey with APTN, and it was kind of nice to come full circle. And for the communities, I mean, this is not just about fishing. You know, it's about treaty rights. It's about a way of life. And so it was, you know, it was kind of an emotional journey for me and for people who are in the story.
Well, it sounds great, and the preview that we've seen, it does look beautiful. So, Trina, appreciate you coming on and speaking with us about it.
Thanks, Dennis.
And you can watch the first episode of Trina Roach's two-part documentary, Living Treaties. Part 1 tonight, immediately following the APTN National News. A new Indigenous Theatre Festival is set to be the first of its kind in Canada. Anishinaabe playwright and humorist Drew Hayden-Taylor joined other artists at Trent University Wednesday to announce No Goat Jiwana, Indigenous Fringe Festival. Well, what is a Fringe Festival? Co-founder Joanne Argue explains.
So Fringe is anything performance-based. So it could be theater, it could be dance, it could be clown, it could be anything. And anybody can apply. So if you have a great idea, it doesn't have to be fully formed even when you apply. You have 5 months, 6 months almost. And so anyone can do it, anyone can come and watch. But as an audience, what you'll get is a series of shows that could be about anything. They could be any length from 5 minutes to an hour. They could be on any topic. The only restrictions are that you can't harm the space and you can't harm each other. So after that, it's a pretty wide open thing.
Should be good. Winnipeg's is fantastic. That's your APTN National News for this Friday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. APTN Investigates is next. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We leave you tonight with the sights and sounds of the Christmas lights being turned on in Iqaluit. Have a great night.